Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Blue Rage, Black Redemption, a Memoir by Stanley Tookie Williams. Foreword by Tavis Smiley. Epilogue by Barbara Becknell. Narrated by Ferlon Webster Jr. President Nixon emphasizes that you have to face the fact that the whole problem is really the blacks. The key is to devise a system that recognizes this while not appearing to. H.R. Haldeman, The Haldeman Diaries, Inside the Nixon White House. Forward. It started out as a gray Friday morning, and as I rushed into a West Oakland McDonald's to grab a breakfast sandwich, I heard the commotion coming from a table of older black gentlemen in the back of the restaurant. "If he killed those people, he ought to die," said one. "Well, whether he did it or not, if he stays locked up for the rest of his life, that ain't living," said another. "He might as well be dead." Although I tried to avoid this breakfast table debate, as soon as I was spotted, I was summoned to the table. "Tavis Smiley, what are you doing here?" one brother yelled out. "We're talking about that gang leader Tookie Williams who was supposed to be executed for killing those people in L.A. back in the day." "So, Smiley," asked another, "what do you think? Should he die?" The whole scene was surreal. I had just phoned to Oakland International Airport that morning, and ironically, my radio producer and I were on our way to San Quentin to meet with Stanley Tookie Williams. He asked to meet me in person before doing an interview that would be aired on both my radio and television shows. It was November 25th, 2005, the day after Thanksgiving, and I was already riding a sea of emotions long before being confronted by the Breakfast Club. Of all the McDonald's we could have chosen. The truth is, at that moment, I wasn't sure how to respond to the brother's question. All I knew for sure is that I am vehemently opposed to the death penalty, and as a person of faith, I believe in the scripture where God says, "Vengeance is mine." So, without going into too much more detail, that was my answer as I wished the brothers a good day. As I got back in the car, I started thinking about the morning ahead. Although unfortunately I visited friends or family members in jail over the years, fortunately I had never been to death row. I wasn't sure what to expect, but as for Stanley, I had a little bit of insight. When Jamie Foxx came on my television show, he talked about what it was like to portray Stanley in the television movie Redemption, the Stan Tookie Williams story. Jamie also told me that in spite of Stanley's imposing figure, a massive chest and bulging arms and legs from bodybuilding, Stanley was very gentle and soft-spoken. When we arrived at San Quentin a short while later, I found all of that to be true. After going through 2 metal detectors and security doors, we waited in a small visitor cell that held an old table, a few chairs, and a small barred window that looked out onto the bay. A few minutes later, a guard escorted the shackled, gentle, soft-spoken bodybuilder with glasses and gray hair to the cell. After his cuffs were unlocked, he reached out, shook my hand, and said, "I'm Stan, and I've been waiting to meet you." As we sat down, Stan immediately opened the window, and we began to talk. We talked briefly about the childhood he discusses at length in this book. We talked about what it was like to be in prison for nearly 25 years, what an average day was like, and how he had coped for all that time. We talked about his children's books and his Nobel Peace Prize nomination. Then I asked some of the tough questions. I asked him about his life as a gang leader and how he felt about all the death and destruction caused in the black community by gang violence in Los Angeles, where I live, as well as many other parts of the country. I asked him about the murders for which he was convicted and how he felt about the victims' families. I also asked him about the fact that he reportedly refused to assist law enforcement with information in their efforts to arrest, prosecute, and convict other gang members. Stan solemnly and candidly answered all my questions. He told me that he was sorry for his gang involvement and for the havoc he had personally wreaked in the community. He said that he was sorry for the losses suffered by the Owens and Yang families, but maintained that he was innocent of the murders. He told me that he believes God allowed him to go to prison to pay for some of the horrible things he had done in his life, although ultimately he was being punished for crimes he did not commit. Regarding his cooperation with law enforcement, Stan gave me a somewhat more complicated explanation. He said that it was a violation of a prison code for him to discuss certain gang-related matters because of broader implications that could lead to more violence for him and other prison members. Then we talked about the power of redemption. Stan told me that prison had afforded him the time to read and learn and grow. He shared how through prayer, reflection, and discipline, he had changed from a young, violent man filled with rage to a man whose life revealed redemption. Throughout our conversation, Stan held my gaze and his calm never wavered. And then we talked about his impending death. He told me that he had already told the prison that he had chosen to deny his last meal, and with the exception of Minister Louis Farrakhan, he would deny last rites or counsel with any clergy. I told him about the brothers at McDonald's and the questions that I had been asked. In particular, I wanted to know how he felt about fighting to spend the rest of his life, which could be another 25+ years, behind bars. Death or life in prison? What does it feel like to face that inevitability? Stan smiled as he told me that his ability to influence young people to stay out of gangs was reason enough to want to live. He said that in spite of the soul-stripping regimens of prison, he had learned how to create and experience his own joie de vivre, the French term for joy of life. As our conversation ended, we stood, shook hands, and, as I patted him on the back in a brief embrace, he reminded me to keep the faith. I realized that this could be the first and last time I would see him. It was. 3 weeks later, Stan was executed by lethal injection by the state of California. The night before he died, I couldn't sleep. I stayed awake past midnight, and after he was pronounced dead, I felt numb. Even after such a brief encounter, I felt a connection to another black man whose life, through bad circumstances and bad choices, like so many others, had ended way too soon. I also felt sorrow for all the mothers and fathers and communities that have lost loved ones to gang violence. After wrestling with these thoughts, I realized that Stan's legacy can be one of tragedy and triumph. It is also a legacy that helped me grapple with the power of redemption. I believe that Stan reminded our society that we send people to prison to rehabilitate them, and we have to believe that process is real and possible for even some of the worst offenders. Ultimately, if we don't believe in redemption, we don't believe in America. For many reasons, meeting Stan was a life-changing experience that reminded me that but for the earnest prayers of my mother and the grace of God, as a black man, I too could have been one of the 4 black men in prison, on probation, or on parole. I was blessed to have that personal encounter with Stan, but for all of those who will never be able to witness his courage, conviction, and commitment to prevent young people from taking the same path he did, you can experience some of that pain and passion throughout this book, Blue Rage, Black Redemption. I sincerely hope that for many young men and women in Los Angeles and throughout the country, Stan's death will reaffirm the importance of life. Tavis Smiley, Los Angeles, 2007. Introduction. The title of this book represents 2 extreme phases of my life. Blue Rage is a chronicle of my passage down a spiraling path of Crip rage in South Central Los Angeles. Black Redemption depicts the stages of my redemptive awakening during my more than 23 years of imprisonment on California's death row. These memoirs of my evolution will, I hope, connect the listener to a deeper awareness of a social epidemic that is the unending nightmare of racial minorities in America and abroad as well. Throughout my life, I was hoodwinked by South Central's terminal conditions, its broad and deadly template for failure. From the beginning, I was spoon-fed negative stereotypes that covertly positioned black people as genetic criminals, inferior, illiterate, shiftless, promiscuous, and ultimately 3/5 of a human being, as stated in the Constitution of the United States. Having bought into this myth, I was shackled to the lowest socioeconomic rung where underprivileged citizens compete ruthlessly for morsels of the American pie, a pie theoretically served proportionally to all, based on their ambition, intelligence, and perseverance. Like many others, I became a slave to a delusional dream of capitalism's false hope, a slave to diseducation, a slave to nihilism, a slave to drugs, a slave to black-on-black violence, and a slave to self-hate. Paralyzed within a social vacuum, I gravitated toward thughood, not out of aspiration, but out of desperation, to survive the monstrous inequities that show no mercy to young or old. Aggression, I was to learn, served as a poor man's merit for manhood. To die as a street martyr was seen as a noble thing. In 1971, I met Raymond Lee Washington, may he rest in peace, and we ultimately decided to unite our homeboys from the west and east sides of South Central to combat neighboring street gangs. An erroneous grapevine suggests that the Crips formed in 1969, or even as early as the 1950s. Most Crips themselves are unaware that the original name for our alliance was Cribs, a name selected from a list of many options. But the short-lived label of Cribs was carelessly mispronounced by many of us and morphed into the name Crips, our permanent identity. Most of us were 17 years of age. The Crips mythology has many romanticized, bogus accounts. I never thought it would be necessary to address such issues, but I can set the record straight. For Raymond Washington, for me, and for others who fought and often died for this causeless cause. I assumed that everyone in South Central knew that Raymond was the leader of the East Side Crips, and that I was the leader of the West Side Crips. A few published chronicles have Raymond attending Washington High School and uniting the neighborhood West Side gangs where he supposedly resided. In fact, Raymond attended Fremont High School on the East Side where he lived. A fundamental inquiry would have revealed that I lived on the West Side, where I attended Washington High and rallied our homeboys in groups of local gangs. Even our former rivals have a better understanding of the Crips' origins than many social historians. Most of the public misinformation has been fostered by academics, journalists, and other parasitical opportunists, stool pigeons, and wannabe Crip founders who shamelessly seek undue profit and recognition for gang genocide. There is no honor in insinuating yourself as a player in this legacy of bloodletting where your feet have never trod. Another version incorrectly documents the Crips as an offshoot of the Black Panther Party. No Panther Party member ever mentioned the Crips, or Cribs, as being a spinoff of the Panthers. It is also fiction that the Crips functioned under the acronym CRIP, for Community Resource Inner City Project, or Community Revolutionary Inner City Project. Words such as revolutionary agenda were alien to our thuggish, uninformed teenage consciousness. We did not unite to protect the community. Our motive was to protect ourselves and our families. There are people who say it was karmic justice that Raymond and I, who impinged on society in 1971 with a violent pact, deserved our exit from society in 1979. Raymond to the grave, and myself to San Quentin State Prison. They cry out that I am incapable of redemption. My detractors' attitude toward my redemption is driven largely by my open apology to black folks and others whom I have offended by my helping to create the Crips over 33 years ago. My detractors argue that I could not be redeemed because I have not apologized to the family members of the victims I was convicted of killing. Please allow me to clarify. I will never apologize for capital crimes that I did not commit, not even to save my life. And I did not commit the crimes for which I was sentenced to be executed by the state of California. Being a condemned prisoner, I am viewed among the least able to qualify as a promoter of redemption and of peace. But the most wretched among society can be redeemed, find peace, and reach out to others to lift them up. Real redemption cannot be faked or intellectualized. It must be subjective, experienced, and then shared. In the past, redemption was an alien concept to me, but from 1988 until 1994, while I lived in solitary confinement, I embarked on a transitional path toward redemption. I underwent years of education, soul-searching, edification, spiritual cultivation, and fighting to transcend my inner demons. Subsequently, the redeeming process for me symbolized the end of a bad beginning and a new start. In time, I developed a conscience that empowered me to think beyond the selfish I principle. Armed with new insight, I discovered the means to control my ego, which enabled me to reunite with God, to reclaim my humanity, to discover inner peace, and to find my raison d'etre, my reason to be. Since then, I have written 9 anti-gang and anti-violence books for children, created the Internet Project for Street Peace, an international peer mentoring program that links high-risk youth in other countries to their counterparts in the United States, and wrote a local street peace protocol that provides guidance on how to initiate a gang truce and is available to anyone who chooses to download it from my website at tookie.com. Yes, redemption has resurrected me from a spiritual and mental death, and whether people are able to accept my redemption or not, they can never take it away. God chooses to redeem, not the laws of the government, the media, the sanctimonious, or the vindictive. To be redeemed, I have learned, is to be at peace with oneself. In fact, true virtue is self-victory by a path of redemption to peace. To avoid damaging others, certain names, nicknames, and quite a few well-known incidents have been excluded from Blue Rage Black Redemption. For the same reason, I have used pseudonyms for some of the people I include in this book. Otherwise, the story I tell is true. Part 1. Blue Rage. Chapter 1. Born in the Bayou. On December 29, 1953, in New Orleans Charity Hospital, I entered the world kicking and screaming in a cesarean ritual of blood and scalpels. Because this was the 1950s in pre-civil rights Louisiana, my 17-year-old mother, a colored woman, was deprived of anesthetics as her torso was slit from sternum to pubic bone. Over and over again, she sang the Christmas carol Silent Night to distract her from the pain. I was christened Stanley Tookie Williams III, but mostly referred to as Tookie. Perhaps my laborious birth and a seizure I experienced before the age of 2, requiring a spinal tap, foreshadowed more tragic things to come. But I've always felt that the real adversity fell on my teenage mother because of her station in life, a black woman living in the South and with very little money. Morbid conditions of poverty were eager to devour us. Being exposed to this apocalyptic society, as I grew to adolescence, my thin skin of innocence began to peel slowly away. In my life, the natural progression from maternal weaning to paternal guidance was absent. My father was the weak link in the family equation. He had abandoned us before I reached my first birthday. My memories of him were so remote that I could not have recognized him in a jailhouse lineup. He was like a stranger showing up once in a blue moon, bearing gifts and an uncertain smile. His attempts at playing part-time Santa Claus and spreading good cheer failed to win me over. As far as I was concerned, my father was an unwelcome visitor whom I watched carefully until he vacated the premises. My mother was the true backbone of the family. She was hardworking, serious, tough, and soft-spoken, and had the foot speed of a cheetah. I can attest to that quickness through my many failed attempts to escape punishment. Prior to my mother's pregnancy, she was well known as a track star. Her genes were passed down to me. I could outrun my peers and many older youths. Standing at 5 feet 2 inches, she was a vision of loveliness with chocolate-hued skin, a shapely physique, and long, silky black hair. But my mother's beauty attracted a lot of unwanted male attention. Though her no-nonsense expression held most men at bay, a few boldly approached. Their foolhardy advances compelled me, for a while, to carry a sharpened 7-inch butter knife concealed in my waistband. To protect my mother, I would have happily become a ninja mercenary. Unknown to my mother, I later stashed that knife beneath a slab of rock in the backyard. Had she discovered it, I would have been severely beaten, or disciplined, as she called it. My mother adhered religiously to the Judeo-Christian Bible, in particular, Proverbs chapter 13, verse 24. He who spareth his rod hateth his son, but he that loveth him chastiseth him betimes, whips him quickly. Yes, my mother loved me deeply. and I regularly felt her love sting. But compared to the beatings some of my friends received from their parents, I got off easy. I will admit the biblically inspired beatings did make me tougher. On the other hand, her punishments failed to derail my misbehavior. The frequency of beatings aged me considerably. I became more unruly, distant, and indifferent to the predictable consequence of my actions. By no means was I born a criminal. I understood the penalties for my actions all too well. Though my mother tried to instill in me the fundamentals of right and wrong, the development of my conscience was shaded with different meanings. I learned from the street culture that criminal activity was an economic necessity and violence a means to a desired end. Plain and simple, in my neighborhood, if you wanted something, you had to take it, and then fight to keep it. I clashed often with my mother over my mindset and incorrigible behavior. Whatever was physically possible for a mischievous youth my size to do, I did. Motivated by greed and envy, I took to stealing little food items and toys from stores. If my mother happened to discover any item unaccounted for, she would march me back to return the item, or would destroy it. Although I didn't completely understand this, my philosophy was hardening: adapt and survive. That was the street rule. Sometimes my partner in crime was Rex, my brown and white mutt dog. The entire neighborhood was in an uproar over my letting Rex run through the flower beds and chase chickens and roosters. Time and time again, I was warned about unleashing Rex, but it was all fun and games to me. Eventually, I had to watch teary-eyed as Rex was hauled away to the dog pound. If there was a lesson to be learned, I didn't grasp it. Being mischievous, hyperactive, and with a short attention span, I had to find something to do. My older cousin Walter and I used to slide and tumble on a gunny sack down a nearby dirt hill. Too poor to afford baseball equipment, we liked playing stickball with rocks and would play stickball for hours before dinner. That was stopped after Walter hit a rock that smashed into my forehead. Blood gushed everywhere. My grandmother, Mama, simply patched me up with some beech nut chewing tobacco, a trusted home remedy, and I was good as new. But my stickball days were over. I believe it was the lingering racist effects of Jim Crow, systematic discrimination against Southern blacks during the period following the Civil War, as well as my incorrigible behavior that fueled my mother's desire to migrate to California. She first planned to leave me behind and then send for me after she got settled, but I was too hyperactive for my aunts and my aging grandmother. If you recall the Beverly Hillbillies and the woman called Granny, you'll have a pretty good notion about Mama's stature and style of dress. A beautiful Cherokee Indian, she was 5 feet tall, about 90 pounds, with whitish-gray shoulder-length hair and a copper penny skin tone. She was a devout Baptist who had served as a deaconess for 17 years in the New Salem Baptist Church in New Orleans. Mama spoke softly, her melodic voice often issuing quotations from biblical scriptures. Her religious influence was evident in each of her 16 children, 9 daughters and 7 sons. Mama's gospel sermons of fire and brimstone held my attention for hours. I enjoyed sitting on the porch with her, drinking ice-cold lemonade, listening to her preach. Afterward, I would bombard her with questions, but I could not fathom why the religious figures in drawings and paintings were all white, and most of them glowed. I remember trying to sneak a peek whenever I saw white men, women, or children, just to see if they really did glow. They did not. In all of the religious children's literature I was given to read, there was an obvious absence of black people. Everybody was white: angels, Jesus, Adam, Eve, Cain, Abel, Moses, and Noah. Only the devil was red. I had asked Mama, where were the black people like us? Did God only make white people? Mama always seemed to be holding back. The more I'd ask race-based questions, the more she would say, "Boy, you're tiring me out with all your questions." Though I never did get a straight answer, I still believed something was not right with all those pictures depicting white figures as divine. Decades would pass before I'd be able to uncover the answers to those questions. I relished Mama's home-cooked meals, especially her gumbo and sweet potato pie. The gumbo consisted of crabs, shrimps, oysters, clams, crawdads, chicken, mild and hot link sausages, okra, and gumbo filet. The taste was heavenly, etched forever in my taste buds. Her sweet potato pies were better than any store pies I ever tasted. There were rare times when Mama would fall silent. The mention of my grandfather inevitably stopped her. He was a huge, muscular, loving, pensive man who worked tirelessly on the railroad and held other jobs to support his large family. He died from overexhaustion. He worked himself to death. He left behind no pictures of himself. He didn't like taking them. My mother said he would fight if you tried to take a picture of him. Often my mother would tell me, if you want to know what your grandfather looked like, just look in the mirror. Since he loved Mama as I did, there is no doubt I would have loved him too. I guess I didn't realize how much I loved Mama until my mother and I were on the Greyhound bus waving goodbye to her and our other relatives. Fear and curiosity had me wondering what was in store for us in California. I could see the sadness in Mama's expression mirroring the tears streaming down my face. Chapter 2. South Central. My mother and I were silent throughout most of that long bus ride to Los Angeles in 1959. Neither of us talked that much anyway. It was difficult for us to express our feelings, probably one of the reasons we weren't in tune with one another. Still, our bond was evident. My mother struggled hard to clothe, feed, and provide for me. She was a fighter who had to wade through incredible obstacles to her progress. In more ways than she cared to admit, we were alike, determined, stubborn, demanding, quick-tempered, and fastidious. Besides our characteristically serious expression, each of us had a black mole on the upper left side of the nose. I adored my mother, and I regret never voicing those feelings to her. As she slept on the bus, a beam of sunlight shone through the window onto the smooth dark brown skin of her face, and I wondered if my mother was as worried as I was about our destination. After several days, the Greyhound bus finally reached the bus terminal in downtown Los Angeles, California. The ambience was strange. It was like being on another planet. People dressed differently, talked fast, and moved fast, as did the cars and trucks. I saw a small crowd of men who seemed to mirror comedian Red Skelton's portrayal of hobos. It was the first time I had ever seen a hobo close up. This was the so-called City of Angels, where my mother hoped to achieve prosperity. If she could have foreseen the path I would follow, no doubt we would have quickly reboarded the bus to return to New Orleans. After several days and nights in a motel, my mother located an affordable, furnished place to stay. It was a white duplex apartment on 43rd and Kansas on the west side, the area called South Central, or South Los Angeles, as it was recently renamed. The apartment was positioned far in the back, behind two larger duplexes. The front door of the duplex was set up high, about 3 feet, with 3 rickety steps up to the door. Immediately inside was the kitchen. To the left was a small living room, where I slept on a couch that unfolded into a bed. To the right in the middle of the living room was a door leading into my mother's bedroom. Inside her room, to the left, was a tiny bathroom. The entire place was smaller than a tiny classroom, but it was home. We lived in a predominantly black area of private homes, apartments, and duplexes. As I grew older, I realized that it wasn't the typical urban ghetto. It had a deceptive look of prosperity. It was a West Side colony of poverty behind a facade of manicured lawns and clean streets of Cadillacs, Fords, and Chevys. The neighborhood was a shiny red apple rotting away at the core. I was the new 6-year-old on the block, soon to undergo the ritual that would determine my position in the pecking order. The scenario was no different than one between nations, corporate executives, siblings, animals, or anyone else vying for status. The first day, outside the duplex, I was presented with a fight-or-flight option. Monroe, a stocky black youth about my height, strolled up and asked my name. I was about to say Stan when Monroe suddenly rained a barrage of punches on my head. Caught off guard, out of panicked anger, I began to swing wildly in defense. Whether it was a lucky punch or a slip, Monroe fell to the ground. Spurred by fear and instinct, I jumped on top of Monroe and started wailing away at his head. Then, abruptly, I was snatched up by Monroe's heavy-set mother, smelling of cheap wine and cursing as bad as any man. She held me by the head with one arm, vice-like, while holding in her free hand a jug of wine that was spilling all over me.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?